Welcome to SEC Football Live here on the 440 Sports Network. That is Stephen Godfrey at 38 Godfrey, and I am Braden Gall. You can get to me wherever it is you waste time on the internet at Braden Gall. Stephen, college football is back. You are back. It is great to see you. How are you? Are you ready?
Good. Yes, and absolutely not. No, I'm not ready. No.
I have not been.
It's gonna be a weird year,
dude. I have not slept well the last 2 nights. Not because it's 102 degrees in Nashville, but I have not slept well. It's just my mind's racing right now. I guess it's not a good place to be mentally before week 1 starts. Like you're not going to sleep in December, but like it's really bad if you're going into week 1 not rested. It's like losing your left tackle and your left guard and then having to play 2 freshmen like Notre Dame is in week 1. It's a bad situation for me to be mentally, but I'm here for you folks. So here you go.
No, I think it's conditioning for this should probably start about 3 weeks ago. Yeah. If you have not scaled up, that's probably on you.
We got the long, exasperated sigh, not even a minute into the episode. I do appreciate that. So, Stephen, before we get started, some stuff today on the show. We will dive into week 1. There's some great matchups. I have some theories about all these different narratives that develop. I know we're sort of anti-narrative as like a collection of college football fans. But I think there's a lot of stuff that could happen this weekend. So I want to get your thoughts on that. Expectations about how we evaluate teams and programs and coaches and with the new everything, right? We've been talking about this all summer, but now it's time. It's here. And we've got coaches who are already facing some intense scrutiny in week number 1. I've got some takes I've had all summer, Stephen, that I want to sort of float by you and see if like on a, I don't know what kind of scale we should use, but I want you to tell me how absurd they are versus, all right, you could see that happening. So we'll do some of those a little bit later on.
All right.
We'll do that a little bit later on. And if you want to jump into the comments, please, by all means, we will take questions and comments from all of you guys throughout the course of the show. Every single Wednesday, 3 o'clock on the YouTube page. So if you're watching on YouTube, we do appreciate you guys. Give us the thumbs up, rate, review, subscribe, share, do all that stuff. Get some folks in here, and then Twitter and Facebook as well. But really, the podcast goes out immediately following the episode every single week. And we're going to have some fun this season. So glad to have you, Stephen. Where can everybody find all of your stuff? SplitZoneDuo.com, Washington Post. Do your spiel here.
It's everywhere. SplitZoneDuo.com. So that's more college football than any human being should ever want. And yet there are many human beings who want that much. If you would like a Texas San Antonio game broken down, if you want to know who's going to be the number 2 team in the Conference USA, like I can talk Jacksonville State for 35 minutes.
I have the over Jacksonville State 7.5 this year. What do you think?
Without a doubt.
Yep.
Without a doubt.
I thought it was easy money.
Oh yeah, dude. Rich Rod is like, I don't know if he's satisfied and like, no offense to different parts of the South, because I'm from a small part of the South, but like just down in the middle of nowhere, running the ball, enjoying life, beaten up on an inferior conference product until he plays Liberty. Like, yeah, he's doing good.
Still the greatest what if. Still the greatest what if in the history of college football is what if Rich Rodriguez had taken the Alabama job and changed all that. I think Jacksonville State, All-American Clay Webb, by the way, All-American offensive lineman for Jacksonville State. There you go. We've gotten 2 or 3 quality Jacksonville State points onto the show in the first 5 minutes.
I'm telling you right now, there like you can low key run a better than average roster under the radar when you're in southern states and like not have an SEC program. This is why like all of college football is shifting south in a really weird way from a talent perspective. It's why the Sun Belt is probably the best G5 conference in America.
Just ask future Kentucky head football coach John Summerall. All right, so
subtle.
I mean, come on, it doesn't take a lot of brain power to connect the dots from the guy to his alma mater. That's not that crazy.
I mean, Arkansas could open.
That's true. Listen, I've had a theory all summer about Mark Stoops. I will float it to you, and we'll get you to sort of react in real time and tell me how absurd things are versus how possible or plausible or impossible things are on that list. So my first thought and first question for you here is, it's a great slate of games. I'm glad ball is back. I am tired of all the other stuff that we have to talk about in the offseason, and I think fans are ready for it. I don't know if they're ready for how it's all going to look at the end of the year or how some of the dynamics will work throughout the course of the year. I think we've already seen Georgia Tech as a team that is sort of the embodiment of why the playoff expansion is maybe good for the game. That's a team that if they get hot, things get right. Haynes King stays healthy. All of a sudden they could get to 9 or 10 wins, and that's a team that can make the playoff now. Never had a chance really because they're not quite good enough probably to go 11-0, 11-1, 12-0. I have this. I can't tell if this first weekend, Godfrey, is going to be – it feels like this giant collision of narratives where Florida and Miami is just That's just a baked in recruiting war on a football field.
Right.
You got Notre Dame with Marcus Freeman's facing a lot of questions about sort of his upside. Can Notre Dame come into the South and win the SEC? Blah 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 blah. All that stuff. Texas A&M $70+ million for the new coach. Culture's changed. There's a narrative there. LSU, can Brian Kelly win a big game against a big time opponent? If you want to call USC that. USC can't stop anyone on defense. These are all narratives. I'm not saying any of them are fair or real in 2024, but it's all stuff that's out there. Clemson is trending in the wrong direction. Dabo won't evolve. But, all the same stuff. Mm-hmm. Do you think that all of that in general is applicable to week one? That we
I'm writing this down. Yeah, I know. I'm writing this down like I'm grading your homework here. I think I missed one of your narratives. So A&M, Notre Dame, LSU, USC, Clemson, Georgia. What was the game in there else?
Florida, Miami.
Narrative. Well, yeah, and that one is almost too. It's almost too easy to discuss that one because everyone's going to want to reduce it to Billy Napier. And, I don't know if that's as much of a fait accompli as everyone thinks it is. The fastest way to dismiss that game is that it is not the end of the world if Miami loses, and it shouldn't be the end of the world if Florida loses. However, that won't be the case. But maybe the best thing saving Napier right now is that I think a lot of the decision makers involved in his hiring would also go as well. So It's not going to be as fast or sudden as people think, barring some sort of cataclysmic on-field result. Let me do this backwards in terms of interest. Okay. It's not that I don't care about Clemson or Georgia. It's that it's a kind of a reductive matchup. We've seen it start neutral site, start a season before. It's interesting to see the shift from a couple of years ago when like Clemson entered the game as a favorite, at least like a Vegas favorite. I think of all the things that you rattled off, probably the fairest statement is, and I think will ultimately be the most correct prediction that you could. And I know these aren't predictions, but probably the most correct thing you said is that
prediction. It's a prediction of what people are going to talk about.
It's like a feeling. Yeah, you have a feeling.
It is.
Clemson is trending in the wrong direction relative to what they were. That's not even entirely fair to Clemson, but it's also inarguable based on you've yet to reestablish Trevor Lawrence level quarterbacking ability, as well as turning your nose up at the portal, as well as turning your nose up at NIL, as well as being criticized for not being able to accept new schematic ideas from assistants until they bring in Riley. It's been a rough 3 years, and yet I think 80 odd programs in the Power Four would trade circumstances in situations with Clemson in a heartbeat. So none of that says anything about Georgia, by the way.
No, and I want to say, sorry to interrupt. I want to say 4 or 5 of the losses that Clemson's had in the last 2 years are either to like number one or in overtime. So you can paint, to your point, you can paint Clemson in either direction. And, stability is a thing that we all are talking about. We want in college football. Coaches want it desperately from a roster management standpoint. And Clemson and Dabo are the picture of that. But like we all they're like a punchline because of that. Oh, you don't take any players in the portal. What kind of idiocy is that?
And again, yet all of this is a standard built by winning multiple national championships.
Yeah.
Because everything that you just said, minus the whole we don't believe in the portal sort of cultish tendency of Dabo as a person, the standard of losing only a handful of games to the essentially the best opponents possible, and that result creating a negative impression of your overall year, that's what happens when you're a multi-time national champion. No other program would be judged that way. So I don't know if it's like radical to say this, but there are questions about Georgia, at least. It obviously they feel like an automatic in a certain regard, but I don't think this game will necessarily be any kind of blowout in that way. I also don't think Georgia wants it to be a blowout, to be honest.
All right. Well, so I've heard that floating around the ether all week. Why is Kirby going to be vanilla in this game, and why is Clemson better suited to make this a rock fight than we expect? Look, they're very good on defense. I get that. And I like the Matt Luke Riley combination and Klubnik in his third year. Like I can make the case why it's all going to be better, but Georgia is still Georgia. Why is Kirby going to play it safe in this?
Because game? if you believe Georgia is Georgia, then why would you play an ace when a 10 or an 8 would do? So that implies a level of presumption that Georgia has that level of line of scrimmage control, that they have that ability to dictate tone the entire game. Now, things got slippery at points last year for Georgia in ways they didn't expect. You remember the Auburn game, for instance, right? I'm not saying this is an automatic. I believe it will be a little bit closer in terms of talent v talent because it is week one. And there are more uncertainties in week one than at any point in the season. Okay. One of the few tropes that I believe in, like one of the coach speak terms that is actually 100% true, is that you improve the most between weeks 1 and 2. But that also means that you come out in week 1 and you have some sort of deficiency that probably you and your team and your coaches haven't self-scouted for. So that's why I like this to be close.
So I agree with all of that. What's interesting though, if you're not to the one we didn't want to talk about, this is the one we're talking about now, which I find to be hilarious. But Georgia's 2 questions, if you want to make them that, and again, relative to Georgia's standards of questions, right, is like, all right, Carson, more of this is now on Carson Beck, elite offensive line, but McConkey and Bowers did a lot of work. You mentioned Auburn. McConkey and Bowers did a lot of work on those fourth quarter drives for Carson Beck when they came from behind to beat Auburn. So the 2 safety valves that they threw the ball to when they needed to all of last year are now gone. The running backs are not as good. The receivers are not as good, and the offensive line is elite. So it's more on Beck, right? That's number 1. Number 2, this is not the the immovable object on defense the way it was record-setting numbers 2 or 3 years ago, in particular against the run without Davis and Carter. But Clemson doesn't feel like it has the pieces at all to take advantage of that second one at all, unless they've done a lot of work on the offensive line and Matt Luke has like worked miracles and all of a sudden Klubnik has developed. I don't see how Clemson's offense takes advantage of any semblance of a question for Georgia's defense. That being said, the other side, I could see Clemson's defense winning a lot of battles against a Georgia team that doesn't have a bunch of elite proven playmakers. So I just don't think they've got all of the pieces to take advantage of that.
So it'll be a muddy game, and that's fine. Yeah. That's totally fine.
All right. So you believe that all these narratives are accurate? You believe that all this stuff
I just unpredictable? No, I believe everything about Clemson. I think they have probably the most work to do institutionally, not even so much as a football product. The matchup with Georgia is just honestly, frankly, not that interesting because they've done it multiple times. And also, look, regardless of what happens the next couple of years, the ethos, the identity of Georgia is still pre-Kiffin Alabama. It's slow cooker. It's I keep saying the word reductive, but on offense, like Georgia's never going to want to do anything particularly elaborate unless they can be incredibly effective being simple. They are incredibly effective being simple.
That's almost pre-playoff ideology. Like
it is, but it works.
That's absurd.
Like, okay. But they can still win in the raw, so to speak, on personnel acquisition. So why would you assume any extra risk? So that's why sometimes they're not interesting to talk about because there's something of a known quantity. LSU USC is the most volatile for sure, by far.
I think I can make the case it'll be by far the most entertaining game. Two defenses that were absolutely atrocious. 2 quarterbacks I think that are stepping into systems that are very well suited for both of them. I think Lincoln.
I was going to say 2 new defensive coordinators that I really like. Both of the hires really work. So how fast are you going to assemble a fix? Neither want to be in this week 1 situation for sure on defense.
It's very Spider-Man meme, honestly, the 2 teams. Like if you look at the matchup, and I think it's what makes it an interesting game. It's what makes it volatile. I agree. I think there's a chance that the difference being that LSU's offensive line, and again, this goes right into like tropey narrative stuff. Like LSU's offensive line is so effing good, and USC, can they fix all that shit in one offseason with one coaching change? I don't know. I like LSU in that game, but I think more interestingly is if LSU wins the game, it's the conversation afterward. Like, oh, Lincoln Riley can't put a defense together. They can't stop anybody. LSU, Brian Kelly finally wins a big game. Like, I don't know if any of that's actually true for this season, even if it plays itself out in that game. Does that make sense?
I have a tough time penciling LSU in. I think it's going to be closer than, it's going to be close in a different way than Georgia and Clemson, I guess. But look, Garrett Nussmeier is fine to serviceable. And I don't feel like anyone spent a lot of time in the offseason recognizing that some fundamental things are going to have to change in that offense because he's not Jaden Daniels. Like he's like, you're going to have to get rushing yards. You're going to have to get looks. You're going to have to get like,
they'll be more traditional.
You got advantages in rush lanes. You got matchup discrepancies. Like they won with Daniels' versatility in a lot of their problem games, and this is a return to a fine, but certainly not mobile, certainly not run-oriented quarterback.
I don't know what to make of the offensive coaching staff under Brian Kelly. I think that's sort of TBD with Garrett Nussmeier and some of the changes you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think defensively, to your point, I think Baker and Davis and all those guys are going to do really good work for LSU. I think it's Brian Kelly's going back to sort of like, I need to recruit and develop players on defense at LSU, which is probably a smart strategy instead of trying to portal the entire secondary every single year. Here's the thing, though. I just don't think either of these two teams is all that special this year. I think they're solid. I think they're good. I think it's going to be a great game. Very interesting. Lots of conversation, lots of focus, having its own time slot on Sunday night. But honestly, I think they're closer to like 9-3 teams that finish like sixth in their conference, which is fine. But
9-3 doesn't eliminate you from the playoff. Technically, that's the problem. And So I would say don't be entirely dismissive, but this game, as you move out of week 1 and you worry less about what they are right now and more about what they will be down the stretch, is sort of what the sport is telling you it wants. They want high-profile Big 2 matchups, even with the uncertainty of week 1. And then, I know off the top of my head, USC has Michigan. I think it's like week 4. And then LSU has a little bit of an easier path, and I think their biggest opponent is Ole Miss in like week 5 or 6. What the sport is trying to do is create more of these games in weeks 1 and 2, and then have those two major conferences have another challenge 2 or 3 weeks later. Because in the past, a program like USC or Michigan, maybe not so much in the SEC, would have 5 or 6 weeks of being really, really good, like top 10 on paper, without any kind of actual test to it.
That's true. All right. This leads. We'll save Notre Dame and Texas A&M because I think that one on the field is actually
that's
the best.
My favorite.
It's the best football. I will agree. Like I can write the storylines for Florida and Miami, and the two coaches were hired, I think, 8 days apart, and they've battled in recruiting. It means a lot in that state. The winner gets to claim Brock Berlin, or maybe the loser claims Brock Berlin. I don't know.
I don't think anyone wants to claim Brock Berlin.
But I think Notre Dame and Texas A&M on the field from a schematic standpoint, I think is going to be the best matchup of the entire group. And so we'll get to that in just a second. I've got, again, some rapid fire thoughts. You've already hinted at what you think about Florida, and I've been saying all along this summer, I think Florida is going to be better than people think, and that Napier is further away from the hot seat than people think because the downward pressure on Strickland doesn't exist yet. But we'll see. We'll see. So we'll get to that. So you mentioned expectations, and I want to start because I do think I've spent a lot of the offseason trying to figure out like how to evaluate coaches. And sometimes my brain goes, it's way easier than you think. It's just, you just shifted the goalpost, the Overton window a little bit on expectations. And it's still the same tiered list of expectations, right? It's still Bama, Ohio State up here, middle of the pack, Power 5 teams here. You keep going down the list, right? And so, but I am curious, you said this is what the sport wants from a focus standpoint. Are we already not even 20 minutes into to the conversation about the season, and we're already too focused on? I mean, you're Captain Bearcat here. Are we already too focused on the playoff? Like, are we? I mean that honestly. Like,
all right, let me strip that down for a second in terms of focus, because by the way, if you watched any 45-minute window of coverage in week 0 of Florida State Georgia Tech, any 45-minute window, I would challenge you, including, like, it could have been game day, it could have been the game itself. What did they talk about? They talked about the playoff. They talked about not even the old Florida State narrative, or not narrative, but storyline from last year with what ESPN did to them. I'm talking about the 12-team playoff. It is the bumper institutional house ad on the major broadcast. So, the idea that we're making too much of the playoff, there's $100 million advertising campaign to get casual sports fans who are not familiar with college football informed and affiliated and ready to go and understand the playoff bracket before it starts in December. So I have ceased to worry about, are we reducing this to a playoff only sport, when the sport is very much focused on exactly that.
Well, shouldn't we hold ourselves to whatever standard we want, though? Like,
here's the good news. Before we get to like the SEC, at the macro level, before they screw this thing up even further,
which is what, like 16 teams?
No, I think it's going to be more about how
I hate the neutral site bowl teams. I hate that. It's pretty bad. Selection criteria would be the diplomatic way of saying I think they're just going to jam as many Big 2 teams in as they can, and then it's not going to be representative of the sport. But they're headed in that direction. There's Mr. Bearcat. There he is.
But right now, there's 100-odd teams with some sort of degree of separation towards playoff eligibility, and that's what you want. So how we figure out what we want as individual fan bases and what we expect and what our standards are will be probably the foremost job for boosters and rank and file ticket holders sitting in the upper deck, people who don't have a dime to give to the university. I would say from now until the end of maybe even next season, we tend to speed things up in our culture now. So I would say it's a really kind of a 3-year adjustment, but I don't think we'll tolerate that. What I mean by that is that we now have a host of programs that we're going to talk about as being national, and put big finger quotes here, national title contenders, right? So the 10 seed, the 7 seed, the 8 seed. I'm not even talking about the group of 5. Okay.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm talking about
Ole Miss, Missouri, Tennessee.
No, it's 5 through 11.
Yeah.
5 through 11. Okay. With the addition of 5 through 11, because the conversation about 12 is actually the 12 seed actually includes about 30 teams for a while.
Well, I don't know. I think this year there's like 5 or 6, but go ahead. You know what I mean?
It's pretty deep, man. Like I would not be shocked
Liberty, Memphis, Boise State.
Oh, I can give you a longer list than that. It's very plausible.
All right.
UTSA, Texas State, South Florida, FAU.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. App State in there too?
Oh, definitely. That App State Liberty game is like a play-in game.
Non-conference, by the way, for those that don't know what conference they're in.
Non-conference. Yeah, G5 got to do a lot of
Liberty's toughest game is a non-conference game.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
5 through 11. You rattled off some SEC teams there, and I could probably rattle off some Big Ten teams and
Michigan, Penn State, Notre Dame.
Maybe a handful of like the old school Big 12 teams. Okay. In this list that we're rattling off, it would be schools that have passionate fan bases, have $1 million facilities, keep up in the arms race, recruit pretty well, have good seasons, have dedication and buy-in, but have never once been associated with a national title in the modern age of college football. Okay. You don't have to make the list right now, but you know who you are. You're listening, right? 2 very popular teams this offseason because of what they did last season, Missouri and Ole Miss, right?
I think they belong in the group you're talking about. If you're talking about never had the tools necessary to compete, I don't think you can include people like Penn State and Notre Dame and Tennessee, even though they're in that group this year.
Sure, that's fine. No, that's
just
fine.
For the record, I think
because I'm not. The purpose of this exercise isn't to be backwards facing; it's to be forward facing.
Okay.
So let's just take a 16-team SEC for a second, and let's assume that no matter what, there's 3, probably 4 teams in the playoff every year from one league. Okay. So what's 4 out of 16? It's a little math question. All right.
25%.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Keep going.
If you had 25% playoff eligibility to
my daughter's not home yet. I don't have to do math homework, Godfrey. Stop it.
Dude, it's the worst. If you could spread that around year by year, assuming that there's a cluster of perennial contenders, there's a cluster of sometimes contenders, and then there's a cluster, this is kind of where I want to start the conversation, of schools that almost start to behave the way boosters of basketball programs do. And here's what I mean by that.
It's exactly a basketball.
They sit there after a bad or dissatisfying year and they say, well, he's done some good things for the program, and he went to the Sweet 16 2 years ago. That paradigm is about to apply to, I would say, like 20-odd programs in the middle of the Power 2.
Do you hang a banner if you get to the Sweet 16 in your basketball arena? Yes, you do. Most teams. If you're North Carolina, you don't.
Well, I can damn well guarantee you that if you get out of you're the 5 seed and you will play the 12, and then you move up into the bracket in the second round, that becomes a bowl game because the bowls are still corrupt and still infecting the sport. When you win that game, like if a 5 seed makes a run. So right now, like Oregon is projected as a 5 seed in a lot of brackets.
Oh, because they're not going to win the Big Ten. Yeah.
Right. Assuming that they would like split with Ohio State, get knocked out, whatever. Okay. You get Oregon against Liberty in the first round. We've already seen how that game plays, right? And then you go to the second round. And let's say they go to like Kansas State and win. Just I'm pulling one out of thin air. Okay. Or Utah or whatever. That will be a bowl because they won't go to Kansas State or Utah. They will go to like the Fiesta or whatever. They will hang that banner. And where I'm getting at is, how do you define I don't care. I don't care about Saban. I don't care about that Tennessee won a national title in 98. I don't care about Auburn. I don't care about all of it erases, and we redefine ourselves starting now. Which programs in the SEC specifically expect to be like it used to be, a national title contender in a perennial sense. Tier 2 is which programs expect to be a perennial playoff team. And then tier 3 is which teams expect to once every X years make the playoff. And that's it. Just make it. And then the bottom tier is we're happy. I mean, actually, that's tier 5. Tier 4 is we want to field a competitive team and stay above 500.
Well, okay. So you're talking about a 15-year window moving forward, looking at like a large, or are we talking about the rosters as they're currently, like, you can do it two different ways. So here's my short answer to you is,
okay.
And I've always used this phrase, national championship DNA. Like, and the two things I say about that I use as sort of that are, do you have unlimited resources and do you have access to talent? Mm-hmm. Generally, that's a 6-hour radius around your campus and unlimited resources from any number of places. But generally, it's money. And in the SEC, there are 9 haves, quote unquote, and there are 7 have-nots in that category. And proof of concept tells you, and I can rattle off the list. It's Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, LSU, Florida, Georgia, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and Texas. And then the have-nots are the other ones, the ones that have not competed at a national championship level at any point in any era. Right?
Did you say A&M though?
A&M's the one that has the DNA, but hasn't been able to get out of its own way.
They got something in the DNA.
They are, there's lots of jokes that we could insert here.
So but what I'm saying is,
but if you wanted to go, let me go with your tiers though. If you want to go with your tiers,
I did take Vandy out, so we're doing 15.
Okay, all right. So if you want to do your tiers, I think even within that conversation, it's fine to say that the reason the greatest 2 dynasties of all time have happened at the same place at Alabama, the reason that Florida can win championships, Georgia can be maybe considered the best job in America, that LSU and Texas, I would put those all like there's like maybe 4 or 5 that go on that top tier. So I would break down that top 9 into a second. Then there's the next tier, which is A&M, Tennessee, Auburn, and Oklahoma, which they face some slightly more difficult challenges than those big guys, but they're still pretty well off in this college football hierarchy. And then there's the team that puts up the banner that gets to the Sweet 16, but never really thinks it has a chance to win the Final Four. And that's talking basketball, and that's the Kentuckys of the world, where when they have the best coach in franchise in program history and they have 2 10-win seasons, those teams might get into the playoffs, and we're going to celebrate those 2 teams, probably bring them back 30 years from now with like a halftime alumni celebration. And it's like, oh, you remember that 2021 team that Kentucky had where they won 10 games with Will Levis? Like, that's going to be the thing that everybody remembers in Kentucky history. So to me, it's different.
Okay.
But it's not any different from an order standpoint. Like, it's different in what we're talking about from an expectation standpoint. But it's not different from like a 1 to 15 standpoint.
Here's the trick. Here's the trick. So we did pull Vanderbilt out, and that's not being tongue in cheek. I just don't think that they're comporting themselves as a serious program right now. So
they're playing a different game.
Yeah, something. They're playing something. Playing themselves right now. So 15 teams in 4 tiers. Okay. So the first ones that I inserted automatically into the very top tier are very easy because you can just look at their financial dedication. Okay. Whether they're sane or not is another thing. So I'm going to give A&M the benefit of the doubt.
Oh, you're Alabama on the top tier?
Okay. Watch this. No, this is a financial profile. Alabama, Texas, Georgia, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M. So I just gave you 5 teams. We're down to 10. Okay.
Okay, so why not? Why not?
Wait, just wait.
Right, okay, all right.
Then I have excluded 2 programs that have won multiple national titles in the BCS or playoff era. Okay, Auburn and Florida.
Okay,
you're going to tell me that Florida doesn't expect to be in that tier? Or you're going to tell me that Auburn doesn't expect to be in that tier?
You're talking about at the top with Alabama.
At the very top, right?
Yes, but you have to draw a line somewhere. So
all right, so I want to go to the bottom real fast because we're running out of teams actually real fast. So Kentucky and who else do we want to put down there at the bottom that you've established?
Well, where's Ole Miss and Missouri and Arkansas? Those 3 are interesting to me.
Okay, so here's where this is what I'm getting at. You can easily identify the top. You can easily identify the bottom. Where we would run, we don't have to, the exercise doesn't have to continue in the middle, because here's why. We could spend the next 3 hours debating tiers 2 and 3. Instead, what's going to happen in the next 2 years is that money are going to dictate tiers 2 and 3. The reason why this is important and interesting, Braden, is that nobody believes they're in tier 2 and nobody wants to be in tier 3.
Nobody believes they're in tier 2. Like Missouri doesn't believe they're in tier 2 because I don't think they are. I don't think there's even a debate. But
Missouri might be the one exception because they lack to be totally honest,
6-hour radius.
Nope. There's an emotional DNA that of sort of irrational fervency that just doesn't exist the way it exists in other Southern, the core bedrock SEC
Arkansas,
programs.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right.
I will say this. Arkansas has had such a depressed strata of like results since like the one Petrino Sugar Bowl run that they might be okay living in a in a mid tier. But this is where you get into the idiot's world. And this is not me casting against any particular school at all. Okay. My alma mater, Ole Miss, is spending way above its credit line right now. Right.
They are trying. They are trying to fuck up. They're trying to fuck up the experiment.
Tennessee.
That's what they're doing.
Is constantly trying to make you think it's the 90s. And we're closer to the 2030s now than we are to the 90s. Okay.
Boo.
And, oh, by the way, you can't make this list without including multi-time national champion Florida. But what about Florida right now would tell you this is where it breaks down. And this is my point. Some programs plural, are going to have to redefine expectation, identity, and reality. And there used to be a comfort in acting like Arkansas, friends. Just we'll pick on Arkansas for a second. I love the Hogs. They could say everything they wanted to at the Little Rock Touchdown Club, and they could go out and throw a bag at Bobby Petrino. But reality was they were never making the BCS championship, and they were never making the Field of Four. And there's almost a level, there's almost a level of comfort in that. Okay.
That's Kentucky to me.
Sure. But now there's a reality to where you should maybe be able to pull yourself together enough to grab a 9 seed or a 10 seed one year. Right. So that should become a standard. And then there is the inverse of this where here's the meanest thing I can do. No math in the world, Braden, can prove that Alabama belongs to be in this top tier automatically, except their own expectation. And so the moment that they are falling out of the top 6 seeds, it's going to be a problem for them.
unless it's like, again, there's no proof of concept of this, but unless, again, you continue to recruit at a top 5 level and you can go 10-2 and then win a bunch of games in the playoff because you've got better players. And another team like Ole Miss or Missouri got in on the back of an elite quarterback and a great portal class and a fluky game against so-and-so from another conference. So let me try to make it even like simpler. It's like, if you're going to put, not to argue the tiers, because I agree with you. We could go back and forth on this, but Alabama, Georgia, Texas, LSU, if I'm putting them on the top, let's say, I think those programs, all of which,
oh, by the way, I never mentioned LSU in this entire thing.
I know,
and they were the other multi-time national champion.
Florida doesn't have like the infrastructure as much as the other teams, but you can change that over time. So I think what's interesting is those 4, I would expect fan bases to look at those 4 programs and say, we should probably be in the playoff most seasons. I think that's the way you talk about it. That's sort of like, it's table stakes for basketball programs to make the tournament, right? For Kentucky and North Carolina and Michigan State and whatever. The next tier is, in my mind, Oklahoma, Auburn, Tennessee, Florida, and Texas A&M. And they should be making the playoff, let's say half the time, more times than not, maybe 6 out of 10 years. I don't know. Again, you're going to run out of spots at some point, which is what's going to create people losing their jobs. I think Ole Miss, Missouri, and Arkansas every now and then. And if you're Kentucky and you're a coach and you get in one time, if you're South Carolina, which, by the way, talking about spending over your credit level, South Carolina has been like side of the opposite its entire life. It has been the conservative saver where they've got 90,000 plus at a beautiful, awesome home venue that's a great place to watch a game and a great recruiting base and nothing to show for it.
Right, but those 90,000 never. I would guess that those 90,000 never seriously said we're going to go to the national title game.
No, but
they damn sure expect now to go to the playoff.
But I think if you're Shane Beamer and you coach 8 years at South Carolina, I think you need one.
That ain't
I think you need one. I'm just saying. I think one, and the banner and the team coming back at halftime 20 years from now to celebrate so and so at quarterback and Johnny Blue Skies at linebacker. Like it's that group. I would say it's Kentucky, South Carolina, Mississippi State. Those are the three that I would say if you get in one time as a 10-year, those are very hard jobs to win.
I think I've passed this anecdote on to you before, but my in-laws all went to LSU, and my father-in-law jokingly said when Kelly got hired, because I was kind of saying like I don't think this is a great hire for LSU. I still believe that
about Brian Kelly.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I was like, this isn't going to be what you think it is at all. And I don't think either party understood what the other was about. Okay.
Brian Kelly at LSU is utterly fascinating for a million reasons.
That's a word for it. But anyway, he sort of shrugged at a certain point and he said, well, all he has to do is win one national title. And I was like, what? And he goes, yeah, when you're the head coach at LSU, you just win at least one national title. And I immediately leapt to pick apart the logical fallacy, except he's not wrong.
Nope.
So since that program modernized, and I don't want to get on a Saban thing, but since Saban essentially took it all apart, rebuilt it, he won a national title. Les Miles, with limited cognitive function, won a national title. And Ed Orgeron, who was fired from Ole Miss for never having a season above 500, won a national title in arguably the greatest offensive season I've ever seen.
No, if the last two coaches at LSU can win national championships, then Brian Kelly should be expected to win a national championship.
That's the reason I tell that story is that is probably going to be the expectation for 14, if not 15 of the schools in the Southeastern Conference. And Braden, let's go back to the math we did.
Wait, one national championship at 14 SEC schools?
No, playoff.
Oh, okay.
Making the playoff.
All right.
I would say something like 14 or 15 schools every single year in the SEC are saying, well, our expectation is to make the playoff. And there's maybe 4, probably 3, depending on the year, bids that you can get. And this will be how we define the identity of these teams from here on out.
I don't mind that.
I didn't say I disliked it. I'm just saying it's so much different than being
honestly
he's great and he went to the Cotton Bowl that one year. It's like, no, that's over.
Right. We're replacing it with, Mark, again, I use Mark Stoops as the example. He's the winningest modern coach in Kentucky history. When you pass Bear Bryant, you've done something well. He hasn't won a ton of games that would be considered huge upsets, but he's built a very good program relative to Kentucky standards. He has 2 10-win seasons, and if both of those teams at 11 seasons, if 2 of those teams made the playoff, you would have to look back on Mark Stoops' tenure as the head coach at Kentucky and say that was extraordinary. Like, again, I think it's big about what's relative to the rest of history. It's why Dan Mullen at Mississippi State, I don't use the bowl games as a reason, because there was a proliferation of all these extra games, and Mississippi State was getting in at 6-6, but like to have like 8 straight winning seasons or 6 out of 8 winning seasons at Mississippi State is unlike anything anybody else has done before Dan Mullen got there. And so relatively speaking,
can I ask you sent me a note this morning about how many teams you thought of the Dan Mullen Florida era, and I use era loosely. You said what, 2 teams probably would have made a 12-team playoff.
No, all three of his Florida's teams finished inside the top 11.
Okay.
In the final committee ranking.
Yeah. So let's not worry about the seeding and all that junk. No. Let's just say, where do we think those teams finish, and does he still get fired?
So
he's the worst recruiter in the history of modern Florida.
This is the exact conversation about expectations. And those of us in the media, this is the Coach O conversation at LSU, because we're like, no, we know this isn't going to last. We know, we have information. We know context. We know what he's doing well and what he's not doing well. And we know on like a human level why this is not going to work at LSU long term. It doesn't change the fact that they hit the lottery that one time and all the combinations of things came together and made that 2019 season. That is ultimately what Dan, like, I still think Florida fan is going to evaluate Florida on Florida expectations, which is you need to win some games in the playoff, not just get there. You need to win some games. And I think that's okay for Florida, because Florida is a top tier blue blood, pick a cliche, of college football programs.
I was trying to be nice and simple for the basis of this thought experiment, because we can only 2 people can only talk this out with 16 programs and infinite variability. That's an entire other wrinkle to this test. And this is the whole point of this is I'm trying to, no matter who your affiliation is in the Big Two, you have to now think the way I'm telling you, because this is the new normal. But you just brought up something I was going to avoid this. Making the playoff, Missouri, good job. Arkansas, they hire whoever next year and they make the playoff in 26. Good job. Let's say those Dan Mullen teams. So I'm just going to pick on Dan. They go to the playoff as the, I don't know,
7, 8, 9. Yeah.
And they lose every year.
He's fired.
Do you know who I'm describing right now in a different way? Lincoln Riley.
Yeah, 100%.
Every semi he went to, he lost.
But if you package it with a complete degradation of like all of the recruiting is gone. So like you have to include the context. That's my Coach O analogies. Like you've got to include the context of what everyone knows about what's going on inside the walls of the program. Is he good at this? Is he bad at that? There's a lot of other stuff that goes into that. And to your point about not to continually go back to like Mark Stoops in Kentucky, but it's like eventually everyone gets tired of what you've given them. Kentucky fans are already like 7 wins. We can do better. And it's like, whoa. You guys didn't have like any of your programs, men's or women's athletics.
Yeah.
Or even at the SEC level 10 years ago. And thanks to football, all of your programs have been lifted. Money's been invested. The stadium, that whole main drag right there in Lexington has been completely changed architecturally because of the football program. Mm-hmm. And that helps every female athlete on campus. Mm-hmm. And now they're like, 7-5, not good enough. They're going to play like 6 ranked teams this year, and they're going to go 7-5, and people are going to be like, and this is going to get to my theory on Mark Stoops. It's why I think he's retiring. Oh,
I think I would. I mean, I'm not going to trade on industry stuff on August 28th.
That's not what I'm asking.
But I will say this. I tend to believe in your assessment of his mindset after A&M falls apart the way it does. And I don't, here's one thing that I will talk about as a postmortem. I don't think people realize how close that was. I don't think it's been discussed that much. Like, honestly, I'm talking about like really, really close.
And like one guy made a call and pulled the plug.
I think it was a small group of people on one hand, kind of hit a panic button very, very close to the end, which is funny. Like that's happened to Ross Bjork before. It happened when he was replacing Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss with, he tried to replace him with Dave Doran. Like, that could have dramatically changed Kentucky and A&M. Well, I still like everything that's happening at A&M, and I'll get to that in a second. But like, he is now essentially, Braden, probably standing atop a summit that's not possible. You can't climb a summit, right?
Can't go any higher. No.
And yet, I think the mountain is still kind of mad at him for whatever reason. Like,
well, you flirt with another girl, man. Wife doesn't normally like that.
It wasn't the first time he's done that, though.
No, I know. All right, I'll get to my rapid fire here real fast because I want to talk. Look, we've got all season and then like 9 more years to discuss where expectations should be set and how we evaluate coaches. I think one of the sneakiest, smartest things Brian Kelly has done is continually to hammer home from a messaging standpoint, 10 wins, 10 wins, 10 wins, 10 wins, 10 wins. I'm evaluating myself and my team on 10 wins, 10 wins, 10 wins because 10 wins at LSU gets you into the playoff. And he is trying to drill that bar home into fans, I think. Maybe it's successful, maybe it's not. Okay. But I think that's a good strategy. If I'm Josh Heupel, I am talking consistently about the goals of our program are to get to 10 wins and make the playoff. Get to 10 wins and make the playoff. Because then if you do better than that, great. If you do worse than that, okay. But I think that's a smart place to place expectations if you're doing it outwardly as a coach. All right. Notre Dame, Texas A&M. First, I want to ask you a very scheme question here to change our conversation, which is I cannot wait to see Colin Klein's offense with Connor Wigman in control with an offensive line that is the really kind of the only question at Texas A&M.
Yeah.
With an elite defensive line coached by an elite defensive coach in Mike Elko against a beaten up and potentially very inexperienced Notre Dame offensive line. The matchups on both sides of this ball are fantastic from a scheme standpoint. I kind of like A&M just because of the atmosphere and Elko and the culture. That would be ahead of schedule.
Yeah,
for sure. I think Freeman's defense will have something for him. And Riley Leonard bullied Clemson last year. Totally bullied him when he played for Duke. And that could be the way they win this game too. I have no idea. I have no expectation other than very physical, very high level scheme football in College Station on Saturday.
Klein is like just didn't get talked about enough, in my opinion. Maybe it's because those like the ex Big 12 schools still don't make it into the I don't know. I think they're treated differently when you get into like the Southeast proper. Look, there's probably not a lot of people. If you're a diehard SEC fan and that's the way you approach the sport, you don't really like look at Kansas State that often. But this dude is smart. This dude is creative. And smart and creative are the antonyms of what was going on offense at Texas A&M for the last 2 years. No, I'm serious. Like,
I agree with you. I totally agree.
Don't even worry about the NIL stuff for a second. Don't even worry about the portal. Just the raw talent that came in from the traditional high school recruiting pipeline. The ROI that A&M was getting in development is insane. They should take Jimbo to federal court.
Yeah.
Conversely, those agents are the best lawyers in the world to create agreements like that because he's so woefully underperformed on. And the reason I'm kind of beating this down is there's a good team covered in tarnish in College Station right now. This is a different year one situation.
Yep.
And man, I can't believe I'm saying this because I don't want to compare a good human being with a less than good one.
But put the hand back on the burner. Do it.
This is not dissimilar to looking around and going, hey, David Cutcliffe had a good roster for Duke. Okay. But he was older. Hand got off the rope a little bit. We can fix this faster than people think. I was at an off-season event at a coaching agency a couple of years ago, and I met one of the defensive assistants at Duke going into that year. It was their first year. And so when you meet someone like that, and it was at like a cocktail event, I'm just we're glad handing and BSing for a while. I start talking about long-term things. Like I'm obviously not going to be like, hey, we're really excited to get to Durham this year. And over the course of the evening, I was talking to him. I met his wife, and he's like, hey, and he didn't brag on it. He just said, hey, look, our guy, he's talking about Elko, he's going to get this thing going faster than like you guys, meaning the media, thinks. And I was like, all right, man, good meeting you. I'm serious. That's like, come on, dude. It was Duke. It was year one. And go back and look at the results of that Cutcliffe team, the last one. This is a fiercely better roster that he got on day one. Oh, yeah. He's already been a coordinator here. Yep. He knows how to manage Texas A&M from an NIL administrative PR standpoint, light years better than, not that Jimbo could, but that Jimbo didn't want to do these things, and Mike Elko does. He is more A&M on day one, regardless of where you're from in America, than Jimbo Fisher. And that kind of stuff matters because going out and hiring someone, to get back to your point, in Colin Klein, who says, hey, let's match what we're doing to resource available. And man, does that sound exciting when you are in a place that says, hey, we will dump ungodly stupid amounts of money into acquiring resources for you. That's exciting.
So I love Avery. So I will openly shill for Avery Johnson at quarterback at Kansas State.
He's awesome.
That SEC fans need to go watch him. He's so much fun.
Heisman, whatever you want to say.
Yeah,
watch him.
The quarterbacks in the state of Kansas, I hope, are in New York at the end of the year because I think they both deserve it. And I think there's a chance that they could be playing in the Big 12 championship game. But this is an SEC show.
And he's got long hair, so shout out.
The lettuce is fantastic. So here's the key. Colin Klein ran the football like 25 times a game as a quarterback. He ran the football with Will Howard last year, and he would have run the football from the quarterback position with Avery Johnson. I say all that to say, this is the resources meets scheme because you cannot take Connor Wigman and run him 26 times, 28 times a game. So what does he do from a scheme standpoint and an evolution standpoint? This is what I find him to be the most interesting part of this A&M puzzle because Wigman's a very talented player and he's a very talented coach. How does he blend his background, which is very different than what Connor Wigman does from a background standpoint? I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. And the offensive line is the one that's the question long term over the course of the year for Texas A&M. So I think they can win the game though. So
without a doubt, and it's at home, and fans are going to be energized in a way they haven't been in a long time because honestly, I think to have a staff that wants to respond to the culture there and not be so closed off in ivory tower, I think it's going to go a long way with A&M's fan base. And it's going to be really, really high energy. They get to play a hated Northern team, helmet team. Like I think
it's a great uniform.
Really well in their favor.
Great uniform game for sure.
It's a good helmet game. It's a good helmet game.
All right, so rapid fire here to wrap up. At 38 Godfrey, splitzoneduo.com, Washington Post, anywhere you find college football content, you get Godfrey. So every single Wednesday, 3 p.m., come hang out with us, Central Standard God's Time, and of course, all across the internet, podcast apps, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, rate, review, subscribe, et cetera, et cetera. Please share the show. Tell somebody that we're hanging out on Wednesdays. So here are the things that I've been saying all summer, and I want you to give me some quick rapid fire, whatever. It doesn't need to be a grade, but just like absurd, not absurd.
Okay.
Whatever. My theory on Mark Stoops is that he retires at the end of the year because he's got context here. His father passed away on the sidelines. His brother retired early. He flirted with another job. He's probably accomplished all he can accomplish at Kentucky, and Kirk Ferentz is not retiring anytime soon.
I was about to say, dang, okay, you beat me. Yes, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that, and I was about to make an Iowa joke. All right, keep going. That's good.
So not crazy?
Not crazy.
Okay. Billy Napier he's closer to a contract extension than he is getting fired.
Man, dead in the middle. Talk to me in 1 week.
Okay.
Dead in the middle.
He's got to win at least the Miami game or the A&M game in the first 3 weeks to probably get to the place.
It is an unfavorable schedule.
It is. 8 top 20 teams, according to the rankings, currently on the schedule. Tennessee and Missouri both make the playoff.
No.
One of them does?
One, yeah.
I think if there's 5, one of them gets in. Ole Miss is the one I can't figure out.
5 SEC teams?
If there's 5, I think one of them gets in.
There's not going to be 5.
I don't think so. But I also think in a sport.
I'm not sold on Ole Miss.
Okay. Because you put 12 names on a line, you can go ahead and scratch off 5 of them. You're going to get 5 wrong. Right? Like if you put 12 names down that you're picking, you're probably going to get 5 wrong.
The only teams I'm putting in the playoff right now are from the SEC are Georgia and Texas, with a strong line underneath for Alabama, and then we'll figure out.
And this is one of my next ones because I have Bama ahead of Texas. I think Bama is better this year than they were last year.
No,
in the long term, I don't know what.
Wait, you didn't say long term. Oh, okay.
In the long term, I have no idea what Kalen DeBoer does long term. I think this year, his track record of developing offenses and quarterbacks, they're better along the offensive line. They're going to have a more interesting and more creative running game. Tommy Rees was not it. And I think the offense is better this year, and I think they could be better this season than last year in year 1.
I really like their DCs, both of them, Mo Linguist and Kane Womack.
I think they're better this year than they were last year. And then we'll see about the long term, but I think they're better this year.
So they're 1 loss?
I think they play in the SEC championship game and lose and then get into the playoff. Yes.
Okay.
And then I don't know how sustainable it is. I don't know the sustainability.
I would like to have more confidence in the quarterback position in all game situations. All right, we'll do it. We'll do it next week.
I really like Jalen Milroe.
I don't dislike him.
Okay. Why do you hate Jalen Milroe?
Because you're putting a superlative on it. All right, keep going.
Texas A&M will beat Texas in the final game of the regular season, guaranteed.
Oh, I don't know about guaranteed. I don't know about guaranteed. But I'm excited for that game. I have no idea. I have no idea what's going to happen in the game. But
Texas A&M will knock Texas out of something, either the SEC championship game, a top 4 seed, the playoff. I don't know what it is, but A&M will knock Texas out of something. They still might make the playoff, and they still might be 10-2. But Texas A&M will win the game, guaranteed, and will knock them out of something.
I can't guarantee that, but I'm really excited for the game.
That's good. That's the best football game of the year. Number 1. All right, last one here. Last one is that that Quinn Ewers that I've been arguing that Quinn Ewers is the most important player in the conference. That if he becomes if he becomes otherworldly, if he realizes potential and Sarkisian maximizes his ability, the offensive line is great, and that he becomes the reason they beat teams and not the reason that they struggle against teams like Houston or Kansas State or gets injured 3 times. That he could take Texas and win the whole stinking thing. But if he's just regular old Quinn Ewers, which has been pretty good, but not elite, that he's not bad enough to give Arch the keys, but he's not good enough to win a national championship. So that's my argument, is that Quinn Ewers is the most important player in the league because he could elevate the rest of the program to, historic status.
Does that mean most valuable to his team?
I don't know. I don't know about that. I think that's Dart or Cook.
So
honestly.
Okay,
or Nico.
so if you just stole my bit. So
sorry,
what you just laid out was great and fine, and I wouldn't argue that. But if you are in the more traditional sense of MVP, and like if you in other words, pull it out, like pull a pin out of a structure and it collapses, right? That's the quarterback at Missouri and the quarterback at Ole Miss. Very, very simply. Cook and Dart, they are drastically different programs. If there's an ACL between now and October 1st.
They are the most valuable to their team, and I would put Nico in there as well. But talking about the whole college football picture and the whole SEC picture, I think Ewers is more important to that whole picture and will dictate more inside of the story than those guys at the other sports, even though the other players.
Yes. Well, yeah. Well, yeah, because those programs that team is better. Texas.
Yes. If Quinn Ewers is his best version of himself, Texas could win the whole thing.
Yes. Yes.
And if he's not, and he misses 2 games, and then he plays and throws 22 touchdowns this year, they're going to go 9-3, and they're not making the playoff.
Yeah, I'm fine with all that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Got anything on Dion you want to throw in there?
Look, sometimes you get assignments and sometimes you pick your column topics. And sometimes the fine people at the Washington Post where democracy dies in darkness say, we want you to write about this. And you got to figure out how to do this differently than the other 200 people who have done this.
So your first 2 columns for the Washington Post this year are going to be Florida State and
Dion.
Colorado.
Hey, guess what? The dream of the 90s is alive.
Yep. And your dreams of the 90s, writing for the Washington Post, right? So
yeah, kind of. Yeah.
That's cool, man. It's a cool byline. So
yeah,
not your first year.
I don't hate it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. All right. So every Wednesday, come hang out with us here on SEC Football Live. You can catch Steven where? Where can everybody catch you?
Okay. Split Zone Duo. Just go to @38 Godfrey on social media. But Split Zone Duo, Washington Post, Secret Base. And I actually have another thing coming up soon because I'm just not busy enough.
Follow him at another thing coming up soon.
Another thing. Another.
I'll catch you. I'll see you there, or I'll see you at another time.
Yes. And I'll be in the press box at Vandy this weekend. Come say hi.
Oh,
are you doing that? Are you doing that?
A little Drones v Pavia in week 1. My 13.5 Virginia Tech minus 13.5. Give me the Hokies.
It's going to be 105 degrees. Dude, wait.
It's not going to break by Saturday.
I hope it does.
I thought it's supposed to break.
Better question is how much construction annoyance is still left?
I was over there at practice a week ago, and it's very dusty.
Still,
it's pretty bad.
I went to the Y game last year. That they should not have played a football game.
I didn't exactly know where the sidewalk was at one point. I was like, where am I supposed to walk?
We're doing this again.
Look, they're going to get there. It's small baby steps, Godfrey. They're going to get there. They're going to get there.
Vanderbilt football is small baby steps.
The question is whether or not
are they forward or backwards?
The question is whether or not Clark Lee is still in charge when they get there or not. We'll see. We'll see. SplitZoneDuo.com @38 Godfrey. You can get to me at Braden Gall @440 Sports. Share the product. Tell somebody about it, please. Thumbs up there on the YouTube. And again, that's how we share. That's how we grow the audience and share all the wonderful musings of Stephen Godfrey. So thank you, man. Always a pleasure talking to you. Enjoy week 1. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll have a lot more for you next week. Other than that, enjoy yourselves. For Stephen, I'm Braden. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.